It's October 20. Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform starts its operation today. My name is Svetlana Cheparenko. We start our day with a conversation about the war in Israel. We talk about current solutions to the situation and the world's response. Joining us online is Ihor Semivolos, Executive Director at the Association of Middle East Studies. Good morning, Mr. Ihor. Mr. Ihor. So right away, we would like to ask you about the Russian trace in this war. How can it be tracked? How long ago could Russia start supporting the terrorists from sector Gaza? Well, currently we're talking about indirect evidences. I mean, there is a lack of direct evidences, or they are insufficient to assert that such support by Russia is obvious and apparent. However, without or among those evidences that are already known to us, we know that the elite troops of Hamas are armed with Russian weapons. We have information confirmed by Israeli and American sources about Hamas terrorists being trained in the camps in Syria, where among others they were trained by representatives of Wagner Group or the Russian military, let alone the political context between Hamas and Moscow. All those contexts are of long-term nature. They are historic and quite profound. And in this case, it's important that both Russia and Iran within the last couple of years got so close that we can talk about their strategic alliance. And within this strategic alliance, Russia, whether they want it or not, they end up on the side that supports Hamas quite actively. The ties between Hamas and Iran are known to everybody. It's the supplies of weapons, training of terrorists, and supply of resources. So basically we can assert that Russia is involved in attack of Hamas on Israel, and obviously they have some strategic plan regarding the use of this strike to inflict the damage, strategic damage on the West. So how this will be reflected on support of Ukraine by the West? Will this war in Israel influence the amount of support provided to Ukraine by the West? Well, I would like to quote President Biden, his speech that was pronounced this night, where he stated that the United States of America will continue supporting Ukraine. So basically there are no grounds to say that the support of Ukraine will be waning. So it's a very strict message. I think that the words of the President of the United States of America should be treated seriously. On the other hand, for the time being, there are certain concerns that some fraction of the urgent support that could influence the situation in the battlefield in Ukraine will be re-forwarded to Israel. Yes, there are such concerns, but I think that the resources in the United States of America are sufficient to make sure those concerns don't come true. But apart from the United States, there is Europe, like Germany, France. So those countries already expressed their support to Israel. Well, obviously, but the resources coming to Ukraine, they mostly come from United States, not from Europe. The administration of President Biden wants to unite the support for Israel and Ukraine, and how strong is the Israeli lobby in Congress of the United States? Well, I understand the logic of the administration of the President of the United States. They need to overcome that resistance that emerged not due to Ukraine, but mostly due to the internal political struggle inside the United States. I mean, the presidential elections campaign coming closer and closer, and the adversity between Democrats and Republicans and the activities of Trumpist minority in the Republican Party, and this unification should convince most of the Republicans who traditionally support Israel to vote for this package. On the other hand, we end up in a situation, serious enough from the point of view of communication with the Arabic world, or so to say, the global South. Joint package of support for Ukraine and Israel puts both of these wars in one plane, so to say, and based on the nature of these wars that have different causes and different origin, different circumstances, well, it complicates to a certain extent our relations with Muslim countries, Arabic countries, and countries of the global South, because in this situation we should find an explanation for the world which is inclined to be oriented at the simple solutions, simple schemes. So it's a serious challenge for Ukrainian diplomacy, and I hope they realize it there. Anti-Israeli protests quite harsh in the Western countries. Should we expect any jeopardization of this situation? Well, depending on the way the situation in Gaza Strip evolves, as the ground operation continues, unfortunately, it's virtually impossible to avoid victims and casualties among the civil population. That's quite a dense concentration of people over there. I think that the sentiment in the world will radicalize. I think we will see a lot more protests, and that's yet another problem that we have to deal with. I mean, radicalization of the sentiment in the world due to jeopardization of the conflict in the Middle East is quite a perilous trend, because this conflict is not localized in the Middle East. It has a global nature, so to say, global dimension. So within this conflict, people mostly they decide whose side they are on, even in case they are not directly involved. So it's a systemic conflict that may seriously influence the formation of alliances and unions in the world within the short-term perspective. Israel responded negatively to the offer of President Zelensky to visit the country, regardless of the fact that other leaders were received well in Israel. So why the answer was negative? Does it mean that the Israeli authorities want to maintain good relations with Russia? Well, the representatives of the ruling party, they emotionally accuse Russia of supporting Hamas. But if we check out the policy of Prime Minister himself and his cabinet, I don't really see any changes in their policy. They continue communicating with Moscow. And the story with this visit or no visit, because Ukrainian side says it was only a proposal, there was no official request by the Ukrainian side. And let's put it like this, it doesn't really evidence that the Israeli authorities radically changed the approach to Ukrainian problems. It looks like they really don't care, just like they did not. They don't see us as allies. The number of citizens of dead citizens of Ukraine is the second largest after the citizens of the United States, but the details provided by the embassy are different. Is it related to the fact that Ukraine doesn't allow the double citizenship and it's only the problem of the legal nature? Well, we consider those people as the citizens of Ukraine, and the difference in numbers, it's only about probably the fact that it's very difficult in this situation to collect all the information, and it's mostly the matter of disorder going on in Israel after the events of the 7th of October. Thank you very much. I want to give the floor to the journalists so they ask their questions. Good morning, Nadia Yurchenko, Ukrinform. You've already mentioned the aspirations of Prime Minister Netanyahu to maintain good relations with Russia. So in your opinion, this conversation between Netanyahu and Putin, what was its goal? The Israeli side said that Netanyahu communicated that message to Putin that Israel wouldn't stop, or maybe he wanted Putin to influence Hamas. And is it possible to use Putin as a peacemaker in this conflict? And I will have one more question. Well, yeah, thank you for this question. I think that strategically the goal of Israel in communication is to hold Iran back. And obviously Netanyahu should have delivered a signal to Tehran through that we wouldn't stop, and Tehran is supposed to understand the risks emerging for that country in case they get involved in the conflict directly. So in this case, I believe that this is the key message. As to the mediation, it's clear that Russia aspires to it. They want to use this mediation, this option, to launch the negotiations with, for example, United States of America, because we see here that in Syria, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2014, the case of Syria says that intervention of Russia into the war of Syria brought it back to the big politics, big global politics, and other countries had to take into account Russian position and take into account those circumstances. I mean, the role that Russia plays in the Middle East, the role that Soviet Union used to play before the year 91. So any such conflict is deemed by Russia as an opportunity to resume strategic negotiations with the United States, and at the same time they are really interested in strategic defeat And the statement of Putin in the beginning of this conflict on the very same day after its beginning, it was quite symptomatic that the policy of the United States in the Middle East failed. And the second question, after the meeting of Secretary of the State Blinken with the authorities of Egypt, it was stated that the checkpoint Rafah would be opened, but it's still not open. Nobody is let through. So cannot Egypt agree with Hamas? What is the cause of it? Who controls this checkpost currently? Well, physically it is controlled by the Egyptians, but there is one important thing. Israelis are supposed to guarantee that they would not inflict strikes on this checkpost or any adjacent areas. And for what I understand, for the time being, it's not yet completely solved. No decision is taken so far. We know that during the visit of Secretary Blinken and President Biden to the Middle East, this agreement was achieved. There was also an agreement on the transportation of humanitarian cargo, humanitarian aid, and there was also the agreement about opening this checkpost to let people through. But you see, this is the case when the wars, when the promises face harsher reality, and every party, in this case Israel, having promised one thing, is not yet ready to fulfill on their promises. And one more question, if I may. Israel postponed the ground operation but did not reject it completely. Are they accumulating forces, or are they looking for some excuse to refuse this ground operation? What is the reason to postpone the operation, in your opinion? You know, there are a couple of thoughts about this. One is that Israel has faced absolutely new reality. I mean, in terms of the incredibly large number of hostages, those who were taken captive during the events of the 7th of October, and there is very serious pressure on the authorities from the side of the families of the hostages. And currently Israel doesn't have very specific plan how to set the hostages free, or at least the majority of them free. And this is why the beginning of ground operation is very perilous in terms of possibility of those people being killed. So Netanyahu would be liable for that. That would be a very serious argument for him that can influence significantly his fate, his political fate. So without clear understanding of what is going on with the hostages, whether they could be liberated upon negotiations or upon some special operation, well, you know, it's quite risky to initiate any ground operation. Another aspect related to the northern front, you know, the history of wars in the Middle East knows the cases when the operation in the Gaza Strip resulted in opening of the second front in the north, where Hezbollah was actively shelling the north of Israel. And this scenario seems very dangerous for Israelis. The problem is that, well, we were mentioning Iran in this context, and we clearly understand that Hezbollah is Iran's proxy, but, you know, saying that it's not Hezbollah but Iran directly not through their proxy, would be waging a war with Israel is a very onerous task. So this is another circumstance that holds Israel back, and the West Bank of Jordan River, the Palestinian autonomy, until this very moment, it's at least trying to keep situation under control. However, the situation is gradually jeopardizing, not only due to the events in Gaza Strip, but also because we talk about the Jewish settlements in the territory who are currently armed and who perceive every protest as a direct threat to themselves, and who use the weapons in a manner, so to say, without relying on the rules of engagement. And Israeli aviation was inflicting strikes on the West Bank yesterday already. So we see the escalation in that region too. So it's all quite perilous without doubt. But postponing the operation creates apparently serious problems for the Israelis on a global level, because all that footage of bombardment, use of information warfare within this campaign on both sides, it results to radicalization of the sentiment not only in the Middle East but all around the world. Should the operation start immediately upon the attack, basically the sentiment of the global community would be more inclined to evaluate this operation from Israeli angle. And for the time being, this balance could move, which would become a problem, including the demands set by the United States of America. Let's remember the statement of President Biden, who said that Israel should adhere to the laws of war, which restricts the operational capabilities of Israelis. Well, talking about the adherence to the law of war, we see the West supplying the weapons to Israel without any limitations of range and any restrictions as to its use. To the use of such weapons, what should we do to have the same conditions for supply of the weapons? Well, you know, this question was already asked from the Speaker of the White House, but there are no some clear explanations to this. I think that the problem is mostly that in our case we deal with Russia, a country that possesses the biggest nuclear arsenal in the world, which is a deterrent factor. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ihor. I'm reminding you we were talking about the situation in Israel, the solutions and response of the world. We were talking to Ihor Semivolos, the Executive Director at the Association of the Middle East Studies, and we will continue at 11 o'clock. We'll talk about the situation in Kherson region. Stay tuned.